Look, it's hard to describe how chaotic American politics are right now. And this weekend, things took a horrible turn with the shooting at a Trump rally. Today on the show, how late-night hosts are grappling with this moment, from poking fun at President Biden's age to coming to terms with a very near miss. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. So there's never been a time like this in American politics. I mean, we're talking about Donald Trump surviving a shooting at a rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday. We're talking about President Joe Biden fighting for his political career after failing to convince a lot of his own people that he's sharp enough, that he's not too old to run again. Now, look, we were planning to talk about the return of Hasan Minhaj and his new YouTube show and how he and the whole late night scene has been making Biden's age the punchline. But after what happened over the weekend, a lot's changed. We just found out Jon Stewart's Daily Show canceled its plans to be on the ground at this week's Republican convention, and he's probably not the only one on the late night scene just pumping the brakes and searching for a pivot. So in an America that's divided, what is the role of comedians who cover politics right now? Well, to talk about that, we got Hershal Pandya. Hershal Pandya is here. Ashley Ray is here. Welcome to the podcast, y'all.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Hello. It's, deep breath, lots to talk about. So Ashley, look, I'm going to start with you. Everyone was shocked when they heard the news this weekend. And look, no one has any idea yet how this is going to change the presidential election. What's the role of late night at a time like this?
Yeah, I think for, the American public, late night, these comedy shows, they really do help us sort of set the tone and how to address these things. Is it okay to laugh? Is this serious? How do we come together? Is this something where we have to, look at our high road and take that? And I do think we're seeing that sort of response already where people are going, this is violence. It doesn't matter that it's Trump. We all need to come together, which I think is sort of the place of these like liberal late night talk show hosts to maintain this dream idea of what America is and how we are better than violence and all of that. But now also people don't just get their comedy from late night hosts. We get it from TikTok, we get it from Twitter. And I think that's where you're seeing sort of the American ability to make a joke about anything. It is, I think truly people are right when they say, I don't know that this will still be a topic in a week. And that is shocking to me. But I do think these late night hosts, these kind of traditional comedy establishments are trying to give it the grace of, what we used to care about with presidential assassinations in the 70s and 80s with Gerald Ford and Reagan. It felt real. This, everyone's just kind of like, okay, his ear. So, yeah.
Unreal is it's the time. That is the time. Hershal, we were planning to talk about Hasan Minhaj's new show, which is called Hasan Minhaj Doesn't Know, and his whole big move to YouTube away from conventional late night. Thinking about how Hasan has approached politics in the past, what do you think his role is in this moment?
Well, I think the benefit of Hasan not getting the Daily Show last year is that he doesn't have to make a daily show. And he's kind of talked in the past about kind of wanting to unplug from sort of the hot take discourse and sort of like make work that takes a longer term view on things. And so I think that's what his new show is more equipped to do than kind of respond to the news, right? So his first episode, which he filmed with Senator Elizabeth Warren, was a long form interview, and they filmed it in April, and it happened to be released last week. And it felt newsy just because they did talk about Joe Biden's age, and that was like the topic on everyone's mind after the debate. But I don't think that was intentional. That's just more of an evergreen topic. And so, I think it is possible that Hasan, drops his entire release schedule and shoots an emergency episode where he interviews an expert about the history of political assassination attempts in America. But I think more than likely he probably just sits this one out. And honestly, good for him, because I don't think any late night host is rearing to go right now,
Right. Well, I mean, Ashley, we're obviously going to keep watching this story, but there's another one that just isn't going away, right? And that's President Joe Biden's age. It was the headline of Hasan Minhaj's first episode, and remember, Hasan Minhaj is absolutely transparent about his politics. Like, he's progressive, he's very much on the left. But when you amplify the discourse about Joe Biden's age and make that the punchline, does that risk, helping Trump?
I really don't think that it does. I think there's no person out there who is between Trump and Biden and they're just going, I don't know, the age thing is just the deciding factor for me. That person doesn't exist. I actually believe that making fun of Biden's age helps us to sort of normalize the position that we're in, accept it. Yes, he is old. Joke about it. I think his campaign should joke about it. I think that's how we can just say, hey, we get it. If this were a Republican, they would not care. They would weekend at Bernie's a corpse into the office just to have the position. So like, let's get it together. We got to get the corpse into office. That truly is what it is. I think, it is a good source of comedy. And of course, again, these guys who do late night, they want to say, well, he's a better Biden. He's blah, blah, blah. He should be the greater man and be like Cincinnatus and step down as his time has come to an end. And it's like, no, do you know American politicians? That's not what they do. They lock in for life. He will not do that. Like, let's be realistic. I think it's some just wonderful optimism to think that that could happen. But this is our candidate. This is what's going to happen. There is not going to be a shift up. I love that people want to be optimistic. But this is the reality. So I think these late night shows making fun of it is good. Mm-hmm. Like, it's the situation we're in. Joke about it. And Hassan, I loved this first episode. And what I think the biggest criticism and disappointment of like this age thing is that seeing Elizabeth Warren be so funny and just engage with a comedian, it was like, this is what politicians used to be like. They used to just like go and just do a funny interview and they didn't need to be like hyped up on Adderall. They could just do it. And that I was like, this is what I think people miss from politics is like actual politicians who can engage on a personal level. And it feels like that's what's missing. So I do think in some ways it helps to kind of personalize Biden. It could help if his campaign wanted to embrace it or do any sort of real campaigning. But I think to complain about it is the bigger error and makes it sort of a bigger issue that then Republicans can play into. But if this were reversed, they would not care. If Donald Trump was 99, they would not care.
When you were talking about how they should just embrace the joke, I am thinking back to the Hassan Minhaj interview with Elizabeth Warren, where he's like, you guys need to come up with better slogans. So like, it's like yeah, like now we're just thinking like we need to work in your weekend at Bernie shtick into their sloganeering and just have fun with it. Yeah. Hershal, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think as a rule, like, the reason comedians are making these jokes is because they're resonating with audiences. If the audience didn't find the jokes funny, it would mean they don't identify with the views they're espousing. They would stop laughing, the jokes would bomb, and the late night host would stop making these jokes, right? So at a certain point, like, it's almost disingenuous not to talk about it because like it is on the entire audience's mind. And like, you can say it might help Trump, but like at the end of the day, you can't have that as your like, that can't be the basis for never criticizing Joe Biden, because like at a certain point that is Trumpism, right? We just support something irrespective of the ability or their policies. And so we need to remember that like the audience does dictate what these comedians say, and that's why they're talking about it.
Yeah. Well, sorry, were you going to say something?
I think that was just a wonderful point. Like, you can't just keep saying, well, it helps Trump. It helps Trump. I mean, Joe Biden is guilty of a lot of horrible, evil things, and his age is the least guilty, like the least innocent, it's the least bad. He can't help it. Age happens. So why? Yeah, just you can't keep saying, hey, oh no, Trump, because come on. It's age. He's going to age. When we voted for him 4 years ago, we knew what was going to happen 4 years later. We knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hershal, let's take a listen right now to a few recent examples from conventional late night and how they're handling Joe Biden's age. First off, here's Jon Stewart.
I am in no way saying Biden's got to drop out, but can't we stress test this candidacy? Can't we open up the conversation? Do you have any idea how thirsty Americans are for any hint of inspiration or leadership and a release from this choice of a megalomaniac and a suffocating gerontocracy? It is crushing our spirit.
So that was Jon Stewart, and now here's Stephen Colbert.
Self-sacrifice takes a particular kind of courage, and that is a courage I believe Joe Biden is capable of. I believe he's a good enough man. He is a good enough president to put the needs of the country ahead of the needs of his ego. And however painful that might be, it is possible handing leadership to a younger generation is the right thing for the greater goodest.
So we heard Jon Stewart sounding just outraged, right? And then Stephen Colbert sounding, I mean, I guess really sincere and earnest. So how tough is it right now for comedians to hit the right tone, the right note when it comes to Biden's age?
Yeah, so I think the idea of the right note is always going to change depending on who you're speaking to and what their political leanings are, right? And I think late night hosts obviously can't control that. So I think the best thing they can do is be true to their sensibilities as a host and the audience that those sensibilities have helped them cultivate, right? So for Jon Stewart, since he's returned to The Daily Show especially, he's been speaking to a further left progressive audience. And like that's a group of people who, let's be honest, don't have a representative for them in the political race right now. And they're feeling understandably frustrated by that. So when Jon Stewart yells and screams, I think that audience, it resonates with them because it's cathartic for them. They need someone to voice those frustrations on their behalf. And Stephen Colbert, as you correctly pointed out, was more sincere and earnest. And his audience goes to him for that, right? He's very spiritual. He feels like he can reckon with big questions without necessarily being prescriptive and like knowing the right way to go about things. And his audience likes that from him. And that's what he delivered. For someone like Jimmy Fallon, whose audience tends to be more apolitical or sort of exists across the political spectrum, it makes sense that he's making sort of like silly goofs that don't really necessarily point out his own perspective or tip his hand at where he belongs or where he votes. And that's what his audience wants. So I think because you can't control either way, you just have to take your cues from the audience.
Okay. Well, look, when we're looking at late night from the past few weeks, there's been just almost no mention of Donald Trump. Okay, and I'm sure the shooting will change that. But let's talk about why the focus has been like up to now has been almost entirely on Biden. Ashley, what do you make of that?
I think Biden and the age thing is something you can make fun of. You can also very sincerely speak to the aggravation we feel of why are these our choices. But when it comes to Trump, it really doesn't feel funny. It does feel dangerous to be like, but guys, he was convicted. Why are we even having this conversation? He's the biggest jokes I think I maybe saw mostly on, like YouTube pundits and Twitter is people talking about his name coming up again in the Epstein files. You can't really talk about that on CBS. That's not, a good back and forth banter with your guests. I think it's just kind of harder to bring up the bad things that Trump has done for a broader audience. I think The Daily Show kind of tries, but mostly on the nights when John isn't hosting. So I don't think it has the same impact because, people now are like, Jon Stewart's back to save us. And I am really curious to see how he addresses this shooting and what we're going to get on Tuesday. But yeah, I think it's just people are tired of laughing at what Trump has done. It's just sort of guys, can we just be real? And can someone make this guy not run? And now I think we're going to have a lot of jokes.
Well, Hershal, tonight's going to be the first night where we get to see everyone comment, not just on all, on everything that happened over the weekend. So what do you expect to hear from them tonight?
Yeah, so I think we've been talking for a few years now about how late night is never the first line of response for these things anymore because, the 24-hour news cycle, social media, people have been getting jokes off for a few days now. And I think I can't really say for sure what they'll talk about, but I can speculate based on sort of where the discourse is going, right? So I think most likely it will begin with more of like a solemn condemnation of political violence, not unlike, Joe Biden gave in his address to the nation, not unlike President Obama sort of did on Twitter. And then I think there'll be attempts to talk about the shooting with they'll find angles around it as opposed to talking directly about it, right? So I would be shocked if there are no jokes about I wonder if this is the thing that's going to finally get Republicans to pass gun control. For sure, that joke is coming up. I think I can imagine people talking about sort of the way Republicans have responded to the shooting, where they sort of even further anointed Trump as their idol and martyr and hero. And this was sort of this breathless quality to the way they talked about it. I'm sure they'll talk about that. I can imagine maybe some people talking about some of the conspiracy theories that popped up around was he actually shot? I can see that being a thing that pops up as well. And then I do feel like there will be an attempt to sort of pivot the conversation and be like, yes, we can't treat Trump with kid gloves forever just because he was shot. We have to realize that he is still a political figure with an immense amount of potential to cause harm to the country. And, with the RNC happening this week, I think that's a good opportunity for them to do that because there will be a lot of Republican fodder that isn't just a shooting for them to talk about.
Right. Well, it's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And so thank you both so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate you holding my hand through this.
Thank you for having
problem.
us.
Yeah, thank you.
So Ashley Ray is a comedian, actor, and host of the podcast TV I Say. Is that how I say it? TV I Say, yes. And Hershal Pandya covers comedy for Vulture magazine, and he's in Toronto. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Alamin Abdel Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. So the first time I ever heard the words Abercrombie and Fitch was in the LFO song, Summer Girls. And those words, the words had no meaning to me, okay? Because I grew up in Scarborough, which is, famously diverse suburb outside Toronto. And this brand that ruled the mall culture in the U.S. in the 90s and the 2000s, I mean, it was absent in our lives, okay? And now I realize that was intentional, right? Because it wasn't made for people like us. Abercrombie & Fitch was glamorizing an idealized, preppy vision of youth. They had these ad campaigns featuring young white men and women, half naked, often in unbuttoned jeans, a look that the New York Times once compared to being, and I'm quoting, a country version of the Blue Lagoon. And then they fell out of fashion after controversies and lawsuits where the company was accused of racism and discrimination. Meanwhile, the FBI is investigating its former CEO, Mike Jeffries, over allegations of sex trafficking. But surprisingly, after a big rebrand, the fashion retailer is now more successful than ever. Chantal Fernandez, wrote for The Cut and about Abercrombie & Fitch's makeover, and she's here with me now. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having me. I could not believe I'm having this conversation, but here we go.
Yes.
So, Chantal, describe for me, please, the look that Abercrombie & Fitch was selling back in the 90s and the 2000s.
It was sort of a vision of this super idealized all-American youth, a lot of what you were talking about before, thin, muscular, beautiful people out, playing flag football outside. Everyone in the campaign images was like touching or hugging, and maybe there was a cutoff short or a shirt off. It was really physical and kind of this cinematic experience of an American, prom queen quarterback sort of living their best life.
And did you shop there?
I shopped there. I think I shopped actually more at Hollister, which was the teen brand. It was a little bit less, it had many of the same strategies, but it was a little less sexual because it was for teens. But yeah, I mean, Abercrombie and Hollister dominated the American malls in the early 2000s and the 1990s as well. And it was a huge thing. The stores were dark, the music was really loud. There was always that cologne was sort of piping through the air. Even just stepping into the store was an experience. It was something fun for teens to do. A lot of people also felt really excluded in that space. I think my memory of it was this is kind of funny, because it was a store in a way.
Well, I mean, in reading your article, they also mentioned kind of brown shutters and stuff to kind of amp the exclusivity of it all. And I'm like,
yes,
oh, no wonder.
You couldn't see in from outside, the mall hallway. You had to go inside to really see what was in there, which is a strategy. It's a genius strategy that was, Abercrombie was doing it better than most at that time.
Right. Well, look, of course, when I was reading your article, it really became apparent to me why I was not familiar with this brand growing up, because they clearly were not targeting a customer like me. So can you talk about that? Can you talk about some of the controversies that this company has faced around racism and discrimination?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, in 2004, the company settled a class action discrimination lawsuit, which is sort of crazy to say that it actually got that far, but it was around the way that they hired and promoted store employees, and like basically who was it that was representing the brand to shoppers in stores, white, beautiful people. So that was like the big reputational controversy that they faced in the 2000s. And then I think what led more to, then there was like an interview that Mike Jeffries, the former CEO, had done in 2006 that really didn't resurface until 2013, where he said more explicitly, like, we only want beautiful people in our clothing. That's not a direct quote, but that was the idea. And when that quote sort of resurfaced around 2013, it also really impacted his reputation. And I think was part of the company was struggling at that point. I think trends had changed and the Abercrombie logo no longer meant what it once had. So I think that also contributed to his exit from the company. And then more recently, just last fall, the BBC published an investigation with these allegations from several young men who said that they had been coerced into participating in 2 sex parties at Jeffries' homes and hotels around the world. So that part of the storyline is newer, just from last year, and is sort of still in play.
So, I mean, that is a lot of baggage. So how does a company kind of turn around from that?
Well, I think one is that the CEO, who a lot of these ideas are tied to, left the company 10 years ago, which is a long time. I also think that shoppers today are used to a certain level of corporate malfeasance, so to speak. And I think it isn't maybe as shocking as it once was. And the company itself, when you go into the stores, it feels so different. It looks so different. The leadership has changed. Like if a shopper really cares about that and they want to look into it, I think they could find that a lot of things have changed behind the scenes in the company as well. I know that there's a lot of shoppers. I see commenters online all the time saying like, I can never shop here again after the experience that I had there as a teenager in the 2000s. So there is a group of people who feel that way. I think a lot of people are like, I remember Abercrombie, this t-shirt is nice, the price is good, it feels right. And they don't really need that much more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I realized throughout this conversation, I've been calling it Abercrombie and Finch instead of Abercrombie and Fitch, which it is. And I mean, to the people in Toronto out there, I mean, Finch Avenue, Abercrombie might as well be part of the intersection to me. So that's where we're at, okay? Look, in your article, you describe Abercrombie and Fitch now today as being boring. Okay, like as if they were kind of, if in the past, they were appealing to sort of this preppy look, like, to the Winklevoss twins, let's say. Well, then what are they appealing to now with the image they're selling?
They made a really conscious decision to pivot to focusing on a slightly older customer. So sort of 25 is the age they talk about, but I think it is like 25 to 35, 40, sort of a young adult with disposable income and kind of struggling to find clothing. Shopping is frustrating for a lot of people today. I hear about that a lot in my job, writing about fashion for The Cut, especially since the pandemic. Prices have gone up. Quality and price no longer feels connected in the same way when you're shopping. You could buy something online, it gets to your house, and you're like, this is paper thin, or like on Instagram, this looked amazing, and it's not. And I think they're really benefiting from saying, okay, we're going to be the solid, reliable choice that's between super fast fashion and luxury, but giving you, a great dress, a great pair of pants that you can wear to work, you can wear to, a concert. They're really thinking about like the many different sort of casual, semi-casual events that young adults have. And like, you're not going to buy a work wardrobe anymore and then a week up wardrobe. Things have to go between those different spaces. And it's culture has changed so much, and how you shop for it. I think they've really nailed to understanding what people want in that stage of their life.
And what's really incredible now is that in doing that, they are now more successful than they've ever been, right? So
and selling things they never sold before, like dresses to wear to a wedding or for a bride to wear. You would never think about that. Before, Abercrombie was primarily a men's business, primarily a t-shirt and jeans business. And now, the women's business is really successful with them selling dresses and things like that.
Really fascinating stuff, Chantal. Thank you so much for walking me through this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. That is Chantal Fernandez, a writer for The Cut. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime, wherever you get your podcast. And check us out on YouTube and Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdel Mahmoud. See you next time.